Welcome to the Ghost Story Grandma channel. Today, Grandma will bring you a mysterious and eerie tale. Get ready for it. Midnight at Ravenwood Cemetery. A cold wind howled through the moss-covered tombstones. The clock had just struck 11:45 p.m. Four friends, Ethan, Jessica, Kyle, and Sophia, stood before the rusted iron gates of Ravenwood Cemetery, their flashlight beams trembling in the darkness. Everyone sure about this? Kyle, the thrill-seeker of the group, grinned mischievously. We stay here until midnight and we'll be legends. Or ghosts, Jessica muttered, shivering. She had never liked these reckless dares. Ethan, the skeptic, shrugged. It's just an old cemetery. Nothing's gonna happen. They stepped inside. Ravenwood was eerily silent, except for the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet. Weathered stone angels stood scattered throughout, their hollow eyes watching. Sophia, the most sensitive of the group, suddenly froze. Do you hear that? Everyone went still. In the distance, a faint whisper drifted through the air. The wind died. The air grew heavy. Not funny, Ethan snapped, though his voice carried a slight tremor. Then Kyle screamed. They all spun around. He stood frozen before a cracked headstone. Faded words were carved into the stone. Stay away when the church bell tolls 12. Jessica's heart pounded. I think we should leave. Too late. From the mist, a figure began to take shape. A woman in a tattered black dress, her long hair hanging over her face. The church bell rang. Dong! The first toll. The woman took a step forward. Sophia gasped. Run! They turned to flee, but the iron gate was gone. Only endless darkness remained. The bell tolled again. Dong! The second toll. And then a whisper echoed right behind Jessica's ear. You cannot leave. Heavy breaths, a racing heart. Jessica stumbled backward, eyes wide with panic. A creeping cold slithered down her spine like invisible fingers. Sophia gripped her hand tightly, but fear had frozen them both in place. Kyle clutched Ethan's arm, his voice shaky. We have to get out of here, now! Ethan turned, but the entrance was gone. In its place stood a solid stone wall covered in tangled vines. No iron gate, no path leading out. The church bell rang again. The third toll. The woman in the shadows drifted closer. Her tattered black dress trailed along the ground. No footsteps, no breath. The air around her twisted and warped like distorted fog. Kyle swallowed hard. He gripped his flashlight and aimed it at the figure. The beam flickered, then died. A wave of icy air washed over him, sending a shiver through his bones. This isn't a joke anymore. Sophia trembled, her voice barely a whisper. She's looking at us! Though the woman's face was hidden behind a curtain of long black hair, they all felt it, her unseen gaze burning into them. The bell tolled again. Dong! The fourth toll. Then, a chilling whisper slithered right behind Ethan's ear. You cannot hide. He spun around, but no one was there. Suddenly, from beneath the earth, skeletal hands burst through the soil. Bony fingers, long and twisted, clawed at their feet. Jessica screamed, stumbling backward, cold, rigid fingers locked around her ankle. She fell, grasping at Kyle for support. Ethan lunged to pull her up, then froze. From the darkness ahead, two glowing red eyes pierced through the void. The bell rang again, each chime sealing their fate. Dong! The fifth toll. The shadow lifted its face. A pale, ghostly grin stretched across its frozen lips. Ethan staggered back, his voice barely a whisper. We're trapped. Ethan stumbled backward, his eyes locked on the twisted face before him. Pale, lifeless skin. Lips darkened to a ghostly blue, moving as if trying to speak. But before he could react, an icy hand clamped onto his shoulder and yanked him backward. Kyle screamed as Ethan was dragged toward the crumbling tombstones. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, grabbing his friend's arm. But whatever had hold of Ethan was too strong. A shifting shadow, its form writhing and undefined, slithered up from the earth, long, jagged fingers digging into Ethan's shirt. Sophia, panicked, pulled Jessica to her feet. The two of them rushed to help Kyle, but suddenly the ground trembled beneath them. Cracks splintered outward, and from the depths of the earth, skeletal hands emerged, grasping blindly, searching for the intruders. The church bell tolled once more. Dong! The sixth toll. A piercing scream echoed through the cemetery. It wasn't theirs. The woman in the black dress was now just steps away. Her long, dark hair hung over her face, but beneath it, there were no eyes. Just deep, hollow voids. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, releasing a chilling, inhuman screech. Ethan thrashed, desperate to break free, but the shadowy force kept pulling him downward. Kyle tightened his grip, straining with everything he had. Then Jessica's gaze landed on an old, weathered headstone nearby. Faded words were etched into the stone. She could barely make them out. When the 12th bell tolls, the cursed soul will return in full. Sophia's voice shook as she whispered, "We can't let the bell reach 12. Kyle shouted, desperation in his voice. "Then how do we stop it?" A sudden gust of wind whipped through the graveyard, carrying eerie whispers. The shadow let out an enraged wail, dragging Ethan further into the ground. The bell rang again. Dong! The 7th toll, and then, from somewhere deep within the mist, another voice emerged. "Don't let them awaken. Find the key, before it's too late." The wind howled like 100 wailing souls. The ground trembled as brittle tree roots burst through the soil, twisting and writhing like they were hungry to devour everything. Ethan thrashed, his grip slipping from Kyle's hand as the force beneath dragged him down faster. Jessica frantically scanned her surroundings, searching for any clue about the key the voice in the mist had mentioned. Then she spotted it, a cracked, weathered gravestone with the engraving of a key carved into its surface. The church bell rang again. Dong! The 8th toll. No time to think. Jessica lunged toward the grave, brushing aside a thick layer of dead leaves. Beneath them, a small, rusted metal box gleamed in the dim light. Her hands trembled as she pried it open. Inside lay an old, dust-covered key. Kyle shouted as Ethan's body sank almost completely into the ground, only his outstretched arms still visible. Without hesitation, Jessica gripped the key tightly and spun toward Sophia. The church bell rang. The 9th toll. The woman in black moved, fast as the wind, her hollow face turned toward Jessica, as if she knew exactly what she was holding. No longer silent, she opened her mouth wide and let out a piercing, bone-chilling scream. The air shattered like breaking glass. A powerful gust knocked them all to the ground. Kyle barely held on, his grip on Ethan slipping. Jessica screamed, hurling the key toward Sophia. "Open it!" Sophia caught the key, but the moment she touched it, a jolt of icy energy shot up her spine. Her hands shook as she frantically looked around. No lock, no door, nothing to open. The bell tolled again. Dong! The 10th toll. Ethan gasped as the shadow's fingers wrapped around his throat. Only 2 chimes left. If they didn't act now, he would be lost forever. Then Sophia saw it. On the gravestone nearby, there was a small, narrow slot, the exact size of the key. Without a second thought, she rushed forward and shoved the key into place. The world trembled. The woman in black shrieked and lunged toward her, but it was too late. The church bell rang. Dong! The 11th toll. A brilliant light exploded from the keyhole. The ground beneath Ethan cracked open and the skeletal hands loosened their grip. With one final pull, Kyle yanked Ethan free, just as the abyss sealed shut. The woman in black howled as her body began to dissolve into mist. The air around them warped, distorting reality itself, everything blurred. The final bell was about to strike. The whirlwind of darkness swirled, carrying with it agonized screams of fury. The woman in black writhed, her twisted body contorting as pale, decayed flesh peeled away, dissolving into the vanishing mist. Ethan gasped for air, collapsing onto the cold ground, his heart pounding in his chest. Kyle still clutched his arm, barely able to believe they had pulled him back from the abyss. The church bell tolled one final time. Dong! The 12th chime. An eerie silence followed. The ground stopped shaking, the wind died, the shadows faded into nothingness. Jessica pressed her hands to the earth, her mind struggling to grasp the fact that it was over. She turned to Sophia, who was still clutching the key, her wide eyes filled with lingering fear. Kyle stumbled to his feet, scanning their surroundings. Ravenwood Cemetery was once again just a forgotten graveyard, weathered tombstones covered in moss, no sign of the horrors that had just unfolded. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. We actually survived." But the moment he spoke, a cold breeze swept past them, carrying a faint, chilling whisper. "You think so?" Jessica shuddered. No one spoke, but they all felt it. Something hadn't completely disappeared. Kyle clenched his fists. "We need to get out of here, now." Without hesitation, they rushed toward the cemetery gate, now standing open as if it had never vanished. Everything looked normal again, but none of them dared to look back. As Ethan stepped out last, crossing the threshold onto the empty road, a sudden, icy breath ghosted against the back of his neck. A voice, low and haunting, whispered right beside his ear. "I'm still here." Ethan froze. For just a second, his gaze flickered to the rusted signpost beside the cemetery. In its weathered reflection, he saw himself, but the eyes staring back weren't his own. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the reflection in the rusted metal sign. The eyes staring back weren't his. They were deep, empty voids, black as an abyss. His breath caught in his throat, a chilling sensation creeping through his chest, as if something was peering straight into his soul. Jessica, Sophia, and Kyle turned around as they noticed Ethan suddenly stop. "Ethan!" Sophia rushed forward, grabbing his arm to pull him away. But the moment she touched him, an icy gust swept through the air, making the hairs on her neck stand on end. What was that? Kyle's gut told him something was wrong. He glanced around, but all he could see were the looming trees and the suffocating darkness surrounding them. Ethan finally turned to face them, his face pale. "We can't leave. It's not done with us." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jessica shivered, unable to speak. She turned back to the rusted sign where Ethan's reflection had been just moments ago. Now there was nothing but a faint, ghostly blur. Then a scream shattered the silence. It was distant, filled with agony, but impossible to tell where it came from. "Don't say that!" Kyle snapped, his voice edged with desperation. "We got out. That thing, it's just a trick." But before he could finish, the heavy gates of Ravenwood Cemetery slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The sound rumbled through the ground like the growl of a starving beast. Darkness swallowed everything, save for the weak, flickering light of the stars above. From within the cemetery, a shadowy figure began to take form, emerging from the mist. It wasn't walking, it was gliding toward them, too fast for the human eye to follow. Jessica's breath hitched. Panic clawed at her chest. "We can't stay here. We have to face it." A piercing shriek tore through the air, sending a wave of cold darkness rushing toward them. Now, they had no choice. Whatever secrets Ravenwood had buried for so long, it was time to uncover them. The shadow crept closer, each movement dragging a bone-chilling gust of wind with it. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from its hazy form. It wasn't just approaching, it was pulling him in, its presence wrapping around his soul like invisible chains. The ground beneath them trembled, a silent warning of something on the verge of collapse. Jessica tightened her grip on Ethan's hand, determination burning in her eyes. "We can't run anymore. If we let this go on, we'll never escape." Sophia glanced around, the dim glow from the key in her hand flickering like their last shred of hope. Without hesitation, she took a step toward the shadow. "Stop!" Kyle shouted, but Sophia didn't listen. The moment she pressed the key into a narrow crevice in the stone, a brilliant light erupted, engulfing everything. The cemetery gates burst open. The powerful glow tore through the darkness, pushing it back like a rising dawn. But just then, the shadow let out a piercing shriek and lunged. It shattered into a wave of darkness, ripping through the space around them. Jessica and Ethan gasped, the force of it stealing the air from their lungs. But then, through a crack in a nearby tombstone, a figure emerged. A man's spirit. He raised his hand, and as the light from the key touched him, the darkness recoiled, dissolving into nothingness. "Go now, you have saved yourselves." As the last traces of shadow vanished, Ravenwood Cemetery fell silent. They stood there, bathed in the fading glow, feeling as though they had just escaped a nightmare. But deep down they all knew, though they had made it out, the ghosts of Ravenwood would forever linger in the darkest of nights.